Hello, future Rossies and pre-med explorers. This is Milena Garcia, your host for Ross University Checking the Pulse, a pre-med podcast. This is our mini podcast featuring facts and information about our medical program, insights from current students, and tips from practicing physicians. Each week, this podcast will be broken down in small episodes, focusing on one aspect of our program, also having guests talk about their own experiences as students and as doctors. Attending medical school requires a major financial commitment. Ross University School of Medicine is committed to providing medical school applicants and active medical students with information to help fund your education through financial aid, including medical school loans and scholarships. My guest today is Joshua Verwijst from our Student Finance Department, and he will be discussing options in financial aid, cost of living, and scholarships. Welcome back, future Rossies. Thanks for joining us again. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to finance your MD program. With us here today, Josh, thank you for joining us. Let's have a moment to have you introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Josh Verwijst. I am one of the managers of student finance here at Ross.
Josh, I really appreciate you taking your time here today because this is something that every day we get asked, right? It is a matter of concern, as it should be. Students want to know, prospective students want to know, parents want to know. So let's talk about how to finance their MD program. First of all, we do have a set different groups of students, right? We have a set of US students, we have a set of Canadian students, and we also have additional international students. Let's start with our US students. Let's say if I'm a US student, what are the options available to me?
So the primary option that most students look into if they are US citizens or eligible non-citizens is going to be the Title IV financial aid, which is the regular student finance that you hear about just normally. It's what people use for bachelor's degrees, and then they can continue to use it throughout master's or doctoral programs as well. Getting into the doctorate level, it does change a little bit. There's two different loans that are available through the federal government for eligible students. The first being the federal direct unsubsidized loan, and the second being the graduate plus loan. The differences between these two loans, the federal direct unsubsidized loan, it does have a lower interest rate as well as lower fees that go along with it. So it is the first option we will always look into. However, this loan is capped at $10,250 per semester and does also have a lifetime cap as well. So it's not going to be enough to cover the entirety of the program. So once we reach beyond that $10,250 for any given semester, that's when we start looking at the Graduate Plus loan for students. So that loan is going to have a higher interest rate as well as higher origination fees that go with it, but it doesn't have a cap on it. So it can cover the remainder of your expenses for any given semester. The one caveat that does go along with the Graduate Plus loan is it is a credit-based loan. So there is a credit check that goes with it. If you as a student don't have credit or have poor credit, there is a chance that you will need to get an endorser to co-sign with you to be approved for that loan. Both of those loans, if you've used financial aid in the past, it's the same process. You would go to studentaid.gov, fill out your FAFSA. That's going to determine what your eligibilities are for both of those loans. Outside of the financial aid, there are private educational loan lenders. Sallie Mae is the biggest one that we usually see. There are other smaller ones out there, so you would need to do some research into what private educational loans you have access to. You can also look into a personal line of credit or a personal loan. Those are just general loans that are taken out through, a local bank. A credit card company sometimes offer line of credits for students as well. And then, of course, one thing to always look into is scholarships and grants. So you're always going to want to do your research to see what you qualify for in terms of scholarships and grants.
And I definitely want to hear more about scholarships.
Yes.
But before we move on, what about for our Canadian students? What's available to them?
So Canadian students have similar options. They have what's called the Canada Student Loan Program, or the CSLP. That is kind of the financial aid for Canada as opposed to Title IV here in the US. That process, it's going to vary depending on what province you live in Canada. So we do have what's called the Canadian Financial Planning Guide that's posted on the website. That does have a full breakdown by province. You can see exactly what the requirements are, who you should reach out to apply for those loans, and kind of what the restrictions are, how much you can borrow and things like that. You can also look into a personal line of credit or personal loans. That financial planning guide does also list a few different examples that we've seen students use in the past. So ATB Financial, BMO or the Bank of Montreal, National Bank of Canada. There are different institutions that students can look into to borrow personal loans for education as well. And then, like US students, scholarships and grants are going to be a big one too.
What about for our international students?
International students outside of Canada, the first place to look is always going to be your government's website. So the first place to check is to see if your federal government offers any sort of student loans, any sort of funding for education outside of government aid. Really, you're looking at private lenders for that. So you're going to want to research local banks. If there's large financial companies in your country, sometimes they will offer student loan programs as well. And then again, not to sound like a broken record, but it's very important, always look into scholarships and grants, not just offered by the school, but there's a ton of available scholarships external if you do your research as well.
Not a broken record when it's really good information, right? Free money. Definitely do your legwork. Look for these additional scholarships. I will ask him the question in just a little bit later here. But also I get asked this often, Josh, how much as a student, how much am I able to borrow?
So how much you're able to borrow is going to vary widely depending on the type of lending that you're looking into. So students that are using Title IV financial aid or private educational loans, they can borrow up to what is called the cost of attendance per semester. Your total cost of attendance is a calculation that takes into account all your direct costs, which are going to be things like tuition, fees, things that are charged to you directly by the institution. But then it also looks at indirect expenses as well. Indirect expenses are going to be educational expenses that you're going to accrue while you're in school that aren't necessarily directly billed to you by the institution. So this is going to be the amount you pay in rent when you're doing your clinical rotations, the amount of money that you need for groceries, things like that aren't something that's part of your tuition, but definitely a cost to consider. Every semester there's a calculation done that is your cost of attendance, which is the sum of all of these expenses. For Title IV and private educational loans, you can borrow up to that amount. Keep in mind, this is only going to include educational expenses, so things that aren't deemed educational won't be included. The federal government and private lending agencies won't include funds for anything that it's not deemed educational. And these loans can only be used for student expenses. This is especially important if you have a spouse or if you have dependents. Your school loans will not cover expenses for those people. So keep that in mind when you are budgeting, when you're planning to go to the island for your medical science courses. Those are some additional expenses you'll want to take into account.
Is it different for our Canadian students?
It is. So the big difference with most Canadian students or most international students or students using personal lines of credit is it's not going to take into account those indirect expenses. So with the CSLP, for example, the Canadian Student Loan Program, you're going to be eligible for a maximum amount. They will reach out to the school. They will have you fill out a form that you then have to send to us for completion. For example, it's called the OSAP form if you're an Ontario student. We will fill that out for you, fill out enrollment information, fill out financial information, and that will determine what your maximum borrowing amount is. Typically, those loans are only going to cover those direct expenses. So your tuition, your fees, books and supplies. So keep that in mind when it comes to budgeting. You'll want to make sure you are securing funds for those living expenses as well. If you are using a personal line of credit or just a personal loan through a bank, those maximum amounts are going to be set by whatever the lending institution is.
And Josh, for the future Rosties listening, and if they want to see these numbers in writing, where can they find all this information?
All of the tuition and fee information is posted on the website. Cost of living varies semester by semester. So if you are looking for cost of living information, you would want to work with an admissions coordinator and get in contact with the finance rep to get some more details of what the maximum borrowing amounts are, because those are going to change depending on enrollment, depending on semester. It's different student to student.
Okay, and our main website is medical.rosu.edu. You will find all this listed under scholarships and tuition listed there. Now, we know that medical school is not a cheap endeavor, right? As an institution, we do encourage responsible borrowing. Can you cover a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, responsible borrowing is incredibly important. Just because you qualify for a certain amount doesn't necessarily mean you want to borrow that full amount. So you always want to only borrow what you absolutely need. You are a college student, so I encourage you to live like a college student. You've probably been doing it for years at this point, so continue that trajectory. If you end up borrowing more than you need, you are able to return funds, especially if you were using Title IV funds. You have 180 days from the time those funds are dispersed to the institution to return them. If you return unneeded funds within that 180-day period, all of the interest that would have been accrued on those funds is reversed. Origination fees are all reversed, so there's no penalties if you do end up not using a portion of what you were dispersed and returning it. Keep in mind, you are going to be accruing interest on these loans while you're in school. So anything that you don't need and can send back is going to save you a significant amount of money when you get to the repayment portion when you are done with school.
Do we offer any kind of guidance for the students that are already on campus?
Absolutely. So I oversee the finance advising team. So we have a whole group of representatives that are here to answer your questions, help you with budgeting questions, help you get set up if you want to return funds or you want to reduce the amount that you're borrowing. We can absolutely help you out with all of that. And you would get in contact with us as you started the admissions program or admissions process. We would be reaching out to you to help make sure you have all the information you need about the finance process, help you get everything set up, make sure you're good to go before you actually start classes.
Let's come back to cost of living a little bit more. You mentioned it varies between semesters. I think it is also a personal expense, right? I may not eat as much as my neighbor, so my bills may be a little bit lower, or I may like my air condition a little bit higher than everyone else, so my bills will be a little bit higher. Can you cover a little bit more about how does cost of living in general come in as far as financial aid, please?
U.S. students that are using Title IV financial aid or private educational loans, that's where that cost of attendance calculation is going to come in. So when you sign up for a semester and that budget's created for your full cost of attendance, when your loans disperse from the lender to the institution, we would keep anything that is one of those direct expenses, so the amount that covers your tuition, your fees, and then anything remaining would be dispersed to the student either through direct deposit or through a check to cover their living expenses over the course of the semester. So at that point, it's up to the student to take that credit balance refund that they receive and budget over the course of the 4 or so months for the semester to cover the rent, to make sure they have groceries, and get them through with the day-to-day living expenses. Students that are using the CSLP or a private loan, those are dispersed directly to the student. They don't come to the institution. So that is the student's responsibility to take those funds, make sure they're making their tuition payment with the amount that they received as their disbursement, and then use anything remaining to cover their expenses over the course of the semester.
Let's come back to the more fun and less scary piece of our talk here today, scholarships.
Yes.
Right. How does it work? You talked about how the students are eligible for financial aid, but does it affect their eligibility for scholarships?
So it doesn't affect your eligibility. You can absolutely apply for scholarships, see what you're awarded, apply for financial aid and see what you're awarded. We are always going to put together the best financial package for the student. So the first thing we're going to look at is scholarship or grant eligibility, because like you said, it's a quote unquote free money in the sense that you don't have to pay it back like a loan. So we would always apply any scholarships or grants first before we started to look into loans. Now, how it works if you are eligible for both. Say, for example, you had a cost of attendance of $30,000, just to throw out a number. If you were only using financial aid and weren't eligible for any sort of scholarships or grants, you would take out $30,000 in financial aid for that semester, and that would be the end of it. Now, if you were eligible for, say, $10,000 worth of scholarships for that semester, what would happen is you would receive the $10,000 in scholarships, and then we would take out the remainder, the $20,000 that's left, in aid. So the important thing to remember is that scholarships replace aid. It's not in addition to aid. So you wouldn't take out the full $30,000 in aid and then get another $10,000 in scholarship. The scholarships or grants would essentially reduce the amount that you need to borrow to cover the cost for that semester.
And what kind of scholarships do we offer?
So there are a ton of different scholarships that are offered through RUSM. I definitely, yeah, right. I definitely recommend if you are interested in RUSM to go to the website and then check out the scholarships page. There is a list there of all the scholarships. It breaks down eligibility, criteria, the award amounts, a few scholarships just to give you guys some ideas. We have the Ross Scholar Award, which is an award for academic excellence. We have a Canadian Scholars Award, which is similar, but specifically just for Canadian students that are looking to attend. There is a Community Health Leadership Award that is based off of community service. We also have the Eliza Ann Greer Scholarship, which is specifically for underrepresented minority groups in medicine. So there's a long list of different types of scholarships out there for students. There are also external agencies that offer grants and scholarships. So a lot of local scholarships are available for students. There's a lot of national scholarships for students, but those you have to do a little bit of legwork on your own. Do some research. Google is your friend. You usually have to go through some sort of application process for those, but the effort you put in looking for those scholarships can pay off huge when it comes to repayment.
Right?
Exactly, right?
Yes, yes. I strongly encourage everyone, do your legwork, look for some additional scholarships. You can see that we have different criteria. Some of our scholarships can be stacked with each other. So you may be eligible for multiple scholarships. Go to our website, look at the different criteria. Some of them, the admissions committee recognizes the recipients. Some of them you must apply for. Okay, and their deadlines. So please look on our website for everything that you see that you can qualify for, apply. We certainly encourage people to look into this. Josh, thank you so much for your time. Is there any additional suggestions or advice for our future Rossies listening in?
Sure. To kind of circle back to what you were just saying, do your research. Spend some time looking into all of the options that are available to you, not just scholarships and grants, but also different loans. Make sure you're looking at interest rates, you're looking at repayment length to figure out which one is going to be the best for your needs. Make sure you are only borrowing what you need. It's really easy if you're approved to get 30 grand for a semester, but you only need 25 to keep that extra 5 grand. But after 10, 15 years of repayment, that extra 5 grand is going to cost you a lot more if you don't need it. So, return any unused portion of your aid that you don't need. Save yourself some money in those interests and fees. Also, make sure you have a good understanding of how your payment options work. Different loans work differently. Some you have to make payments while you are in school, some you don't. Some accrue interest while you're in school, some you don't. So you want to make sure that you understand how those different loan options are going to work when you're trying to decide which ones to use for your education. Also, there's a big shift as you move into this portion of your education where a lot of the loan options become non-need based and they are more credit based. So start working on building your credit. Be sure you're monitoring your credit. so that you understand where you're at. It will help you when you're applying to some of these loans to determine whether or not you're going to need a cosigner or an endorser to be approved for those. So just start to think about that as you are doing your research as well.
Josh, thanks again. This is really good information. We often get asked this, and I know it's a little bit scary for some people to talk about tuition, to talk about loans. There's good news in the scholarships and grants that are available, right? Guys, I know this is a lot of information, so please feel free to go back and re-listen to this podcast again to get this information in details. All of it is on the website as well. Josh, if the prospective students here have any additional questions, what's an email where they can reach out?
Yeah, so our email is going to be finaid@rosu.edu.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And for everyone listening, we will see you next time. Good luck.
Good luck.
Thank you for listening to Ross University Checking the Pulse, a pre-med podcast. This is Milena Garcia, your host. This podcast is made for you, so let me know what topics you want us to cover on future episodes. You can send me your comments, feedbacks, and requests to mgarcia@rossu.edu. Definitely follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and our YouTube channel at Ross Med School or on Facebook. If you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, I am working my way to 5 stars, so remember to send me your comments and let me know your ideas. If you're on Spotify, remember to click on the follow button to get our future episodes. All right, see you future Rossies and Pre-Med Explorers next week.